Welcome to my philosophy channel. This video may be long, but if you stay until the end, you may finally understand why education does not set you free, why it quietly shapes you into a role, and why the system you trust may not be designed for you. The most comfortable prisons are those built within the deepest architecture of the human mind. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Education. When we look back upon the thousands of exhausting hours we spent trapped inside the sterile walls of a classroom, we must confront a deeply uncomfortable reality. Why is it that, after 12 or 16 years of relentless instruction, most individuals remember far less from their textbooks than they do from 3 months of casual observation? We are told that education is the magical key to human enlightenment and unbounded personal freedom. Consider the traditional classroom, where 50 unique children are placed within 4 blank walls to be processed like raw materials in a factory. These children possess entirely different genetic backgrounds, diverse intellectual capabilities, and profoundly unique psychological temperaments. Yet, they are all forced to consume the exact same standardized curriculum and judged by the exact same rigid examination system. If schools existed to nurture individual brilliance, their low efficiency would be absolutely scandalous. One courageous educator named John Taylor Gatto spent 30 years infiltrating this massive system from the very inside to understand its true purpose. He was crowned the Teacher of the Year in New York City 3 separate times, reaching the absolute pinnacle of his respected profession. Yet upon reaching that stage, he shocked the entire audience by declaring that he no longer wished to harm innocent children with this educational machinery. Gatto dedicated 2 decades of his life to uncovering the hidden history of the American public education system. He discovered a terrifying truth deliberately buried beneath a century of comforting rhetoric and noble intentions. The modern educational apparatus was never engineered to make you genuinely intelligent or dangerously capable. It was meticulously designed to ensure you remained just capable enough to function, but never truly powerful or autonomous. During his early years as an educator, Gatto noticed a tremendously disturbing and consistent pattern among his students. The students who remained perfectly quiet, unquestioningly obedient, and consistently scored the highest marks often led ultimately mediocre and lost lives after graduation. Conversely, the rebellious children who constantly frustrated their teachers by demanding to know why they had to learn useless information frequently achieved remarkable success. In the real world, we continually blame the education system for being outdated, disorganized, or tragically flawed in its current execution. However, we must recognize that the system is not broken at all. It is actually functioning with terrifying and flawless precision. The invisible architects of modern schools did not want critical thinkers who could challenge their absolute authority. They demanded a manageable population of compliant workers who would never question the grand master plan. This grand illusion of enlightenment convinces us that our failures within the system are entirely our own fault. When we struggle to memorize disconnected facts or perform under extreme standardized pressure, we internalize a deep sense of personal inadequacy. We never pause to consider that the entire academic structure was intentionally rigged to break our natural willpower and subordinate our human individuality to the rigid needs of the collective. Before a child steps foot inside a formal educational institution, they are a magnificent engine of endless and pure curiosity. They relentlessly interrogate the world, asking profound questions about the stars, the behavior of insects, and the mysteries of existence. Yet, after just a few short years within the system, that brilliant spark is systematically extinguished, replaced by a dull desire to simply pass the next meaningless examination. We are falsely taught that education is the sacred process of drawing out the unique potential residing within every human soul. In reality, modern schooling operates as a brutal process of standardization, forcing wildly different minds through the exact same cognitive funnel. The system does not celebrate the magnificent diversity of human thought. It actively suppresses any intellectual deviation that might disrupt the institutional assembly line. The greatest trick the educational establishment ever pulled was convincing society that academic grades perfectly measure human worth. We are conditioned to believe that a letter grade reflects our ultimate capacity for success and future happiness. This illusion of meritocracy teaches us to blindly trust external authority figures to define our value, rather than cultivating the crucial inner strength required to define our own destinies. We must make a vital distinction between genuine education and institutional schooling. True education is a lifelong, self-directed pursuit of wisdom, driven by deep internal passion and the primal human need to understand the cosmos. Institutional schooling, conversely, is a highly controlled environment designed exclusively to program obedience, instill a fear of failure, and manufacture a predictable roster of compliant citizens for the elite to govern. When we finally strip away the noble rhetoric about enlightenment and personal growth, we expose the cold, mechanical architecture of the system. The school was never intended to serve as a magnificent garden where individual human flourishing could take root. It was meticulously engineered to function as an unforgiving sieve, sorting and grading human beings based exclusively upon their willingness to surrender their autonomy to an external power. The light of reason is often used to guide us deeper into the shadows of compliance. The architectural blueprints of our modern misery were drawn long before we were ever born. Chapter 2: The Birth of the System. To truly understand the deceptive nature of the modern educational machinery, we must travel back through the shadows of history. We must return to the early 19th century, to the year 1806. The once mighty Prussian kingdom had just suffered an utterly humiliating military defeat at the hands of Napoleon. The devastated Prussian elite gathered to analyze the root cause of their catastrophic battlefield failure. They realized that their defeat was not necessarily caused by a lack of advanced weaponry or poor tactical strategies. Instead, they concluded that the French soldiers possessed a terrifying execution of orders, while the Prussian troops lacked absolute obedience. The state desperately needed a new type of citizen who would never question authority. Consequently, the Prussian government commissioned a revolutionary system of compulsory national education engineered specifically for social control. Their primary objective was not to cultivate brilliant philosophers or independent thinkers who might challenge the monarchy. They deliberately designed a massive psychological training camp to mass, produce highly compliant soldiers and subservient workers. The entire apparatus was formatted to break the natural willpower of the child and enforce total state submission. This unforgiving system introduced several key structural features that we mistakenly accept as natural elements of learning today. They mandated rigid age segregation to sever the natural transmission of wisdom between older and younger generations. By isolating children with their exact age peers, The state destroyed natural mentorship and forced students to release exclusively upon the institutional authority. The teacher became the absolute center of the classroom universe. Furthermore, they divided the school day into short, artificial segments of time controlled by loud, disruptive bells. This was not done for educational efficiency, but to ensure that no student could ever achieve a state of deep, sustained concentration. Whenever a child became profoundly engaged in a subject, the bell would violently interrupt their thoughts, teaching them that no intellectual pursuit was more important than following the institutional schedule. By the mid-19th century, wealthy American industrial leaders looked across the Atlantic at this Prussian model with immense geopolitical envy. Giants of industry like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan recognized a terrifying threat developing within their own borders. The American population at that time possessed a dangerously high literacy rate, with many rural adolescents capable of reading complex legal documents and operating independent agricultural businesses by age 16. These powerful capitalists realized that a population of highly intelligent, independent philosophers could never be easily managed or exploited. An empowered citizenry would inevitably challenge their massive corporate monopolies, demand better working conditions, and refuse mindless manual labor. Therefore, in 1906, the Rockefeller General Education Board issued an astonishingly brutal internal memorandum, revealing the true heart of their grand social strategy for the American public. They explicitly stated that they did not intend to transform the masses into intellectual thinkers or independent leaders. Their objective was to mold a population of standardized citizens who were docile enough to be managed, but competent enough to operate heavy industrial machinery. They viewed the natural brilliance of the human mind as a dangerous liability that needed to be systematically suppressed for absolute corporate efficiency. The American school was consequently reimagined and reconstructed as a massive social factory, where children were treated as raw materials. In 1914, a report from the National Education Association openly embraced this horrifying industrial metaphor. They declared that our schools are factories, and the students are merely products manufactured to meet the exact specifications required by the expanding industrial sectors of the modern economy. Every single aspect of the learning environment was meticulously engineered to kill individual passion and replace it with reflexive obedience. We are still living within the suffocating shadow of this 19th century military and industrial design. We mistake our regimented training for genuine intellectual growth, never realizing that the system operates exactly as intended. We are submitting to a psychological conditioning program disguised as academic enlightenment. The true tragedy lies in our willful blindness to this historical reality. Believing that we are free and empowered, we send our curious children into these institutional grinders, hoping they emerge as autonomous human beings. Yet, the sieve cannot help but perform its core function, methodically filtering out unpredictable brilliance in favor of predictable mediocrity. The assembly line never stops grinding because the modern economy relies upon our unquestioning participation. When we examine the meticulous architecture of the early public school, we find no space for spontaneous human discovery. The architecture itself mimics the bleak layout of a maximum security prison or a heavy manufacturing plant. Long sterile hallways, uniform desks bolted to the floor, and an elevated platform for the overseer ensure that constant surveillance and strict behavioral control remain the paramount objectives of the facility. Before the implementation of this mass standardized education, children learned through direct apprenticeship and immediate interaction with the real world. They acquired practical knowledge by observing adults, engaging in meaningful labor, and solving genuine survival problems within their local communities. The industrialists systematically destroyed this organic educational ecosystem, replacing it with a highly synthetic simulation of reality where abstract theory utterly replaced tangible human experience and physical capability. This deliberate disconnection from reality was crucial for manufacturing the perfect, dependent consumer and the easily replaceable corporate employee. By confining teenagers inside sterile classrooms until their early 20s, the state prevented them from gaining economic independence or real-world confidence. When finally released into society, they are psychologically crippled, completely dependent upon large corporate structures to dictate their social value, determine their income, and validate their existence. We foolishly believe that the evolution of education was a noble crusade led by benevolent philosophers and compassionate social reformers. In brutal reality, it was a highly calculated economic strategy executed by the wealthiest men on earth to secure their endless dominance. They successfully convinced the general public that surrendering their precious children to the state machinery was a grand privilege rather than a terrifying act of subjugation. A cage designed to look like a sanctuary is still a cage built to keep you exactly where you belong. We mistake the sieve for a garden, believing the mesh was designed to help us grow rather than to filter us out. Chapter 3: The Logic of Selection. When we listen to the beautiful rhetoric surrounding modern schooling, we hear endless promises about cultivating potential and inspiring the human mind. We are taught to view the educational apparatus as a nurturing greenhouse where every unique seed is given the perfect amount of sunlight and water to flourish. However, the brutal reality of this massive global architecture operates upon a completely different and terrifying foundational logic. Education, as it exists within the modern industrial and corporate framework, never truly cultivated anyone. From the very first day it was introduced to the general public, its primary and unspoken function has always been to act as a ruthless mechanism for social selection. It is a gigantic, intricate sorting hat designed to filter, categorize, and stratify millions of complex human beings into highly predictable economic roles. Many individuals react with profound anger when they hear the word filtering associated with their sacred educational institutions. They argue that education has simply become corrupted by modern pressures and has tragically lost its original intention of intellectual uplift. Yet, complaining about the evaluative nature of school is like walking into a bustling casino and expressing deep outrage that they are using plastic chips instead of cash. The system was never pure in the way we romantically imagine. True cultivation occurs when a master philosopher walks alongside a handful of dedicated disciples, engaging in deep dialogues tailored exclusively to their unique psychological needs and evolving curiosities. That intimate process requires an immense investment of time, emotional energy, and personalized attention that no mass society could ever possibly afford to provide to every single citizen. Instead of this beautiful ancient model, we have placed one exhausted teacher at the front of a room facing 50 entirely different children. These 50 students possess vastly different genetic backgrounds, diverse intellectual capacities, and wildly varying emotional traumas. How could any single instructor possibly cultivate the distinct brilliance of 50 unique souls while simultaneously maintaining absolute disciplinary order within the rigid confines of 4 blank walls? The teacher is given a standardized textbook, a rigid master curriculum, and an unforgiving schedule of standardized examinations. These tools were never engineered to transform every child into an independent masterpiece of critical thought and creative genius. They were designed to establish a singular, efficient metric of measurement that could be applied to millions of children across the entire nation with the absolute minimum financial cost. Therefore, the entire experience you endured was not a journey of self-discovery, but a massive, 12-year-long stress test orchestrated by the state. This relentless testing apparatus does not actually measure how inherently intelligent you are, nor does it quantify your true capacity for boundless creative innovation. It meticulously measures a very specific set of foundational behavioral traits required by the modern corporate machine. The first and most crucial trait extracted by this brutal filtering process is your absolute capacity for unquestioning obedience. Can you surrender your personal autonomy to follow a complex set of arbitrary rules that you do not understand and may completely disagree with? When you were forced to copy meaningless vocabulary, words 100 times, you were not learning language. You were desperately proving your absolute submission. Does a modern multinational corporation or a massive government bureaucracy actually need employees who possess this exact type of blind submission? They absolutely do. Because without a foundation of predictable compliance, any large-scale human organization would instantly fracture into chaotic disarray. The school system identifies and rewards the individuals who have demonstrated their willingness to swallow their personal pride and execute instructions issued by external authority figures. The second fundamental trait tested by this educational machinery is your psychological endurance and tolerance for monotony. Can you survive more than a decade of waking up at 6 in the morning, sitting at a hard wooden desk, and engaging in highly repetitive, disconnected cognitive tasks? Can you endure a lifestyle devoid of spontaneous joy simply because an authority figure promised you a vague future reward? If you can successfully navigate the crushing boredom of high school without succumbing to complete psychological rebellion, you have proven something immensely valuable to the corporate world. You have demonstrated that you will not despair when placed inside a sterile office cubicle, staring at mindless spreadsheets for 8 hours every single day. The pain of the classroom perfectly prepares you for the inevitable suffering of the corporate grind. The third critical trait measured by the Great Sieve is your ability to execute complex commands under extreme artificial pressure. The standardized examination room is a deliberately engineered environment of high anxiety, featuring strict time limits, surveillance by authority figures, and immense social stakes. Can you suppress your natural human panic and deliver a predictable intellectual output, while the clock mercilessly ticks down toward your impending judgment? If you possess a brilliant but sensitive mind that freezes under artificial examination conditions, the system will immediately mark you as a defective product. The architecture of mass society abhors instability and unpredictability above all other sins. A student who performs erratically under pressure is deemed untrustworthy by the evaluative algorithms of the state, regardless of how profound their unorthodox ideas or creative visions might actually be. Obedience, monotonous endurance, and execution under extreme artificial pressure are the true holy trinity of the modern educational apparatus. Notice how little these crucial behavioral traits actually have to do with the specific academic subject matter you were forced to memorize. 3 years after graduation, you will have forgotten 80% of the chemical formulas and historical dates that seemed so desperately important at the time. The knowledge itself was merely the arbitrary friction used to test the durability of your psychological engine. When a human resources department at a major corporation looks at your prestigious university diploma, they are not marveling at your deep understanding of 17th century literature. They view that expensive piece of paper as a highly reliable quality assurance, stamp branded directly onto your forehead by the institutional authorities. That glorified certificate silently whispers a very comforting message to your prospective employers. It tells them that you have successfully survived 16 years of institutional processing without experiencing a complete mental breakdown or staging a violent rebellion. It guarantees that you are a standardized, highly predictable human component that can be safely inserted into their corporate machinery with minimal risk of disruption or operational failure. This mechanism performs its crucial sorting function with terrifying efficiency, dividing the population into clear social strata. It meticulously separates those destined to manage the system from those destined to perform the mindless manual labor that sustains it. Through a seemingly objective process of testing and grading, the society brilliantly convinces the losers of this brutal game that their subordinate social position is entirely their own fault. When you receive a failing grade discarding you from the higher echelons of opportunity, the system instructs you to internalize that rejection as a personal moral failure. You do not blame the structural cruelty of the sorting hat. You blame your own inadequate brain. This psychological internalization of defeat is the most powerful mechanism of social control ever invented, preventing the exploited masses from revolting against the elite. The absolute tragedy of this global filtering system is how much genuine human brilliance is mercilessly crushed and discarded along the way. We have confused the ability to memorize arbitrary information with true intelligence and the ability to sit still with true virtue. Countless geniuses are branded as failures simply because their unique minds could not conform to the rigid dimensions of the institutional conveyor belt. We continue to pour our precious children into this unforgiving grinder, desperately hoping they will emerge triumphant on the other side of the funnel. We ignore the invisible scars they accumulate as they are constantly measured, weighed, and found wanting by an unfeeling bureaucratic algorithm. We sacrifice the beautiful complexity of the individual soul for the cold, mathematical convenience of the grand societal master plan. The architects of this vast architecture endlessly promote the comforting illusion that standardized testing represents the ultimate form of social fairness. They argue that because every student takes the exact same examination, the resulting hierarchies must be perfectly objective and morally justified. Yet, forcing a brilliant artist and a logical mathematician to climb the exact same institutional tree is the absolute pinnacle of structural cruelty and injustice. We must recognize the profound difference between discovering a meaningful human purpose and surviving a bureaucratic filtering mechanism. Finding your true purpose requires deep introspection, boundless creative freedom, and the infinite space to make glorious mistakes without facing immediate retribution. The educational sieve affords none of these luxuries, punishing error with terrifying speed while forcing everyone to march in absolute synchronization toward the same arbitrary finish line. To maintain unwavering participation in this exhausting game, society weaponizes the primal human fear of poverty and social exile. From a very young age, students are continually threatened with the terrifying specter of falling to the very bottom of the economic pyramid if they fail to pass through the institutional filters. This relentless anxiety becomes the primary fuel driving them forward, replacing any genuine joy for learning. This manufactured panic inflicts a devastating physical and psychological toll upon the developing minds of the youth. They sacrifice their precious sleep, their natural need for physical movement, and their inherent curiosity just to satisfy the insatiable demands of the measurement algorithms. We are actively trading the vibrant mental health of an entire generation for the comforting certainty of a neatly organized and perfectly stratified labor force. When we finally understand that education is primarily an allocation system rather than an enlightenment project, our entire worldview violently shifts. We can stop internalizing the institutional rejections and start recognizing the beautiful value residing outside the confines of the academic matrix. True liberation begins only when we refuse to let a cold, industrial filtering mechanism dictate the ultimate meaning and absolute worth of our existence. A system designed entirely to find the most compliant components will always ultimately discard the most brilliant and unpredictable human souls. The most powerful lessons are the ones we are never explicitly taught. Chapter 4. The Hidden Curriculum. When we think of the school curriculum, we immediately envision textbooks, mathematical formulas, and historical dates. We assume that the explicit subject matter is the primary focus of the educational enterprise. However, beneath the surface of academic instruction lies a far more insidious programming mechanism. This invisible architecture is known as the hidden curriculum, and it dictates the true purpose of your entire educational experience. The system does not actually want you to grasp the interconnected grandeur of the universe. Instead, it deliberately fragments knowledge into isolated, disconnected subjects. You move from mathematics to literature to science without ever understanding how these disciplines inform one another. This artificial separation breeds profound confusion, ensuring that you remain intellectually dependent upon authorized experts to explain how the fragmented pieces of the world actually fit together. Consider the psychological impact of the school bell. It is not merely a tool for scheduling, it is an instrument of emotional conditioning. Whenever you achieve a state of deep fascination or genuine creative flow, the bell violently interrupts your concentration. You are taught that no intellectual pursuit is ever truly important. You learn to cultivate absolute indifference, instantly abandoning your passion at the command of an institutional signal. Through constant evaluation, the system forces you to surrender your emotional autonomy. Your sense of self-worth is no longer generated from within. It is extracted and handed back to you in the form of a letter grade. A favorable mark induces euphoria, while a poor evaluation plunges you into deep psychological despair. You become addicted to external validation, desperately seeking the approval of authority figures to feel validated. This manufactured dependency extends deeply into the very core of your intellectual identity. The hidden curriculum dictates that every question has only one standardized answer, and only the designated authority figure possesses it. You gradually lose the courage to trust your own intuition or challenge accepted dogmas. Why risk independent thought when the institutional framework harshly punishes any deviation from the official narrative? You are placed under constant surveillance, existing in a state of perpetual evaluation. Your behavior, your punctuality, and your compliance are meticulously recorded in permanent institutional files. This relentless observation forces you to internalize the gaze of the overseer. You begin to constantly monitor yourself, censor your own thoughts, and restrict your own ambitions. The true panopticon does not need concrete walls, because it is built inside your mind. What sort of human being emerges from 12 exhausting years of this intensive psychological conditioning? It is certainly not a free sovereign individual capable of challenging the established order. It is a highly manageable subject who endures monotony without complaint and confuses absolute obedience with genuine moral virtue. The system has successfully replaced your natural primal vitality with a shallow, manufactured desire to neatly fit into an artificial hierarchy. The fuel that powers this entire invisible engine is pure, unadulterated fear. You are taught from childhood that failing to comply with the hidden curriculum will result in immediate social and economic exile. This engineered anxiety quickly replaces the natural human joy of discovery. You learn to value system utility above human worth, willingly sacrificing your beautiful complexity to become a predictable component in the modern industrial machine. We falsely believe that graduating from this apparatus means we have finally finished our education. In brutal reality, graduation merely signifies that the psychological conditioning has been successfully completed. You are now deemed safe to enter the Browder Society because your mind has been flawlessly calibrated to obey. True freedom remains an illusion for those who have subconsciously learned to desperately love the very chains that bind them. A mind trained to wait for permission can never truly command itself. The greatest deceptions are often dressed in the luxurious robes of absolute meritocracy. Chapter 5: Elite Education and Power. When we observe the glittering gates of elite universities, we are instructed to feel a profound sense of awe. We are told that these magnificent institutions are the ultimate engines of social mobility, selecting only the most brilliant and deserving minds from the general population. Yet, this beautiful facade brilliantly conceals a far more cynical architecture. The concept of a pure meritocracy is perhaps the most effective myth ever engineered by the ruling class. During the mid-20th century, elite institutions realized they could no longer explicitly exclude the lower classes without sparking a dangerous social rebellion. They needed a system that appeared entirely fair on the surface while secretly guaranteeing that their own privileged children would continue to inherit the corridors of global power. To achieve this masterful illusion, they invented and weaponized the standardized admissions examination. On the surface, a universal test seems like the ultimate democratic equalizer, judging every single student by the exact same mathematical metric. However, these examinations do not actually measure innate human intelligence or boundless creative potential. They meticulously measure a family's financial ability to purchase years of specialized tutoring and relentless academic preparation. Furthermore, the modern elite admissions process demands a ridiculously extensive portfolio of extracurricular achievements. A successful candidate must demonstrate mastery in obscure classical instruments, elite equestrian sports, and expensive international volunteer expeditions. How could a child born into severe economic hardship ever possibly compete within this highly curated arena? The system brilliantly disguises massive generational wealth as individual intellectual merit, making the inherited privilege appear completely earned and justified. The students who successfully navigate this exclusive labyrinth enter these hallowed halls, believing they have conquered the universe. Yet, they are quickly molded into what has been astutely termed excellent sheep. They are undeniably brilliant, terrifyingly hardworking, and flawlessly polished, but they are also deeply anxious, profoundly timid, and entirely devoid of any genuine individual purpose or meaningful moral direction. These elite institutions do not actually cultivate courageous visionaries who might challenge the corrupt foundations of the existing global order. Instead, they manufacture highly sophisticated tools designed exclusively to manage and maintain that very same order. The graduates inevitably march toward the exact same lucrative careers in financial consulting and investment banking, willingly surrendering their beautiful youth to preserve a system they barely even understand. This is the ultimate and most terrifying function of elite education. It extracts the most capable individuals from every corner of society and systematically neutralizes their revolutionary potential by bribing them with social prestige and massive financial rewards. By absorbing the brightest minds from the lower classes into the elite hierarchy, the ruling class effectively decapitates any potential social uprising before it can even begin to form. A crown earned through complete submission is merely a glorified collar made of gold. We are valued not for our humanity, but for our utility. Chapter 6: Human Capital and Economic Systems. For centuries, the value of a human being was measured by their character, their spiritual depth, or their connection to the divine. Today, we have been entirely reduced to a cold economic metric known as human capital. The modern state views its citizens merely as engines of productivity, raw assets to be developed and exploited for the ultimate accumulation of national wealth and global geopolitical dominance. When did we cease to be souls and become mere capital? As the Industrial Revolution matured into the information age, governments realized that physical factories were no longer the primary source of infinite wealth. The human mind became the new factory. Consequently, education was radically repurposed from a journey of philosophical discovery into a massive investment strategy designed exclusively to maximize future economic output. We are taught to view our educational degrees as personal investments in our own magnificent futures. We willingly assume crushing financial debt because we believe the system promises a handsome return on our intellectual capital. Yet, this very concept forces us to commodify ourselves. We continually refine our resumes and polish our skills not to achieve enlightenment, but to make ourselves appealing products on the labor market. The state pours billions into the educational apparatus, not because it deeply cares about your personal happiness or your emotional fulfillment. It does so because a highly trained workforce is the absolute prerequisite for sustaining constant economic growth. You are educated precisely to the level required to operate complex software, manage corporate logistics, and generate maximum tax revenue, without questioning the fundamental morality of the system itself. This relentless drive for productivity creates a deep, unforgiving anxiety within the modern psyche. If your entire worth is defined by your economic utility, What happens when your specific skills are no longer required by the market? You must constantly upgrade yourself, engaging in endless certifications and hollow academic pursuits just to avoid becoming obsolete. You are running an exhausting race on a treadmill that never actually stops. True human value resides in our capacity for compassion, our appreciation for beauty, and our desperate search for meaning in a chaotic universe. The economic system, however, is completely blind to these profound virtues. It cannot monetize your empathy or tax your philosophical curiosity. Therefore, the school system methodically starves these beautiful human qualities, feeding only the pragmatic skills that the corporate machine can instantly consume. We have internalized this brutal economic logic so deeply that we now judge our own children by their future market potential. We push toddlers into advanced mathematics and foreign languages before they even understand who they are. We are willingly sacrificing their irreplaceable childhoods on the altar of future productivity, terrified that if they do not become perfect human capital, they will be completely discarded by society. A society that measures worth by production will inevitably treat its people like machines. The world we were trained to inherit no longer exists. Chapter 7: The Mismatch Crisis. For generations, the grand bargain of education was extraordinarily simple and highly predictable. You surrendered your youth to the rigid discipline of the classroom, and in exchange, society guaranteed you a stable economic future. This invisible contract formed the bedrock of the industrial age. We endured the suffocating boredom of rote memorization because we believed the promised reward was absolutely certain. Today, that sacred social contract has been violently torn apart by the relentless acceleration of technological reality. We are witnessing a terrifying phenomenon where millions of highly educated graduates are entering a labor market that simply does not want them. They hold expensive degrees and prestigious certificates, yet they cannot find meaningful employment. The system functioned perfectly, but it produced the wrong kind of human being. How did such a colossal structural failure occur on a global scale? The answer lies in the fundamental architecture of the educational machine. The school system was meticulously engineered to produce standardized, predictable workers for a stable, linear economy. It relies upon highly repetitive processes, strict hierarchies, and static information. However, the modern global economy has transformed into a chaotic, unpredictable, and exponentially evolving digital ecosystem. We are attempting to navigate a boundless ocean of infinite complexity, using a navigational map drawn for a 19th century factory floor. The modern world demands radical adaptability, intense creative problem solving, and the courage to challenge existing paradigms. Yet, the school system systematically punishes all of these essential traits. It actively suppresses independent rebellion and brutally rewards unquestioning conformity to outdated rules. Consider the tragic situation of the perfect student in the modern labor market. They spent 16 years mastering the art of waiting for explicit instructions from an authority figure. They learned to memorize the provided standardized answer rather than inventing a completely new concept. When placed into a dynamic corporate environment that demands spontaneous innovation, this perfect student instantly paralyzes with profound existential terror. They do not know what to do because there is no teacher present to assign them a specific grade. There is no predefined syllabus outlining the exact steps required for success. The very behavioral conditioning that guaranteed their academic triumph now ensures their absolute professional failure. They were trained to flawlessly execute a script that society has abruptly and permanently thrown into the fire. Meanwhile, the industries creating true wealth and driving human progress are desperately starving for capable talent. They do not care about your memorized historical dates or your flawless calligraphy. They need individuals who can navigate absolute ambiguity, synthesize disconnected information, and pivot strategies without succumbing to emotional panic. The education system has failed to provide these basic fundamental capabilities to the exhausted modern youth. This terrifying disconnect creates a massive and tragic generation of lost souls. They feel a deep, burning resentment because they played the game exactly according to the established rules. They sacrificed their sleep, their passions, and their irreplaceable childhoods just as the system demanded. Now, as they stand at the finish line, they realize the trophy is empty and the race was completely pointless. Instead of admitting structural failure, the educational apparatus responds by doubling down on its fundamental errors. It urges students to stay in school even longer, recommending more useless master degrees and expensive, specialized certifications. This merely delays the inevitable collision with reality while plunging the youth further into crushing financial debt. More standardized conditioning cannot possibly cure a disease caused entirely by standardized conditioning. The corporations themselves are beginning to realize this devastating truth about modern academic credentials. Major global companies are slowly eliminating university degree requirements for their most advanced and lucrative positions. They have finally discovered that a prestigious diploma often signifies a rigid, inflexible mindset rather than boundless creative potential. The golden ticket of the 20th century is rapidly losing its magic institutional power. As the value of traditional degrees violently collapses, the psychological burden upon the individual becomes unbearable. We are caught in a terrifying transition period, where the old rules no longer function, but the new rules have not yet been clearly written. You must now chart your own unique course through the wilderness, relying completely upon the inner compass the system tried so hard to destroy. We are witnessing the great stagnation of human potential, trapped between an outdated institutional past and a terrifyingly complex future. The institutions that were originally built to empower us have become massive concrete anchors, dragging us down until we radically redefine what it means to actually learn and adapt. We will continue to produce brilliant-minded graduates who are utterly helpless in reality. A map of the past is the most dangerous tool you can carry into an unknown future. The most exhausting battles are fought against the invisible ghosts of our own peers. Chapter 8. The Trap of Competition. From the very first moment we enter the classroom, we are conditioned to view our fellow students not as allies, but as direct obstacles to our own future success. We are thrust into a relentless artificial race that demands absolute perfection, while utterly destroying genuine human connection. The system forces young minds to compete for artificial scarcity disguised as prestigious academic accolades. Beneath the noble facade of academic excellence lurks a brutal engine of social Darwinism. We are systematically taught that our fundamental human worth is strictly relative to the failures of those around us. If everyone achieves a perfect score, the triumphant victory instantly loses its intoxicating value. Therefore, the system demands losers, so that the winners may briefly feel a fleeting sense of superiority. This endless comparison breeds a profound and paralyzing psychological state known as status anxiety. It is a deeply ingrained fear that no matter how hard you work, you will eventually be left behind by the relentless march of your peers. This anxiety becomes the primary fuel source for the entire educational machine, driving exhausted students to willingly sacrifice their mental health and their joy. The ultimate tragedy of this manufactured competition is that true satisfaction remains forever mathematically impossible. When you base your entire identity upon being better than someone else, you inevitably discover that there is always someone smarter, wealthier, or more accomplished. You climb the glittering golden ladder only to realize that there is absolutely no top, just an endless expanse of deep existential anxiety. Within this highly competitive crucible, the natural human capacity for empathy is systematically destroyed and replaced by cold calculation. When a classmate stumbles or fails, the subconscious mind is trained to feel a dark, secret relief rather than genuine compassion. The system deliberately isolates us within our own ambitions, ensuring that we never unite to challenge the flawed architecture of the game itself. This terrifying phenomenon is particularly destructive among the ambitious middle class, who constantly fear slipping backward. Parents transfer their own unresolved status anxieties directly onto their vulnerable children, pushing them into endless extracurricular activities and brutal tutoring sessions. They falsely believe that squeezing enough academic achievement out of their offspring will mathematically guarantee a permanent shield against the inevitable cruelties of economic instability. Yet, this frantic scramble offers nothing but a magnificent illusion of genuine upward social mobility. Statistical reality proves that even the most relentless grinding rarely changes the core trajectory of our inherited socioeconomic class. We are sprinting with maximum effort upon a digital treadmill, sweating profusely and exhausting our souls, only to remain stationed in the exact same position within the great capitalist hierarchy. We transform our most brilliant and capable youth into a tremendous herd of excellent but terrified sheep. They are flawlessly groomed for success, possessing perfect resumes and incredible test scores, yet they remain profoundly hollow inside. They desperately fear taking any meaningful risks because a single unorthodox choice might lower their societal ranking and destroy their carefully curated and extremely fragile public persona. True innovation and human progress always require the absolute courage to fail, gloriously and repeatedly. However, a mind conditioned by relentless academic competition views failure as an unforgivable existential threat rather than a necessary learning experience. Consequently, our brightest minds avoid uncharted territories of true discovery, preferring safe, heavily traveled roads where success is highly predictable and social validation is emotionally secure. To escape this devastating trap, we must radically decouple our sense of value from this toxic mechanism of endless comparison. We must recognize that true success is never a finite resource to be jealously hoarded at the expense of our neighbors. A genuine human life flourishes through deep collaborative creation, diverse ecological niches, and quiet internal joy that cannot be measured by an institutional rubric. The heaviest chains we wear are the ones we forge from the opinions of others. A mind filled with answers will eventually starve if it never learns to ask why. Chapter 9. The Collapse of Meaning. When we finally emerge from the rigorous decades of formal education, we expect to feel a profound sense of triumphant liberation. We hold prestigious degrees and fancy titles. that society claims are the ultimate keys to human happiness. Yet, instead of experiencing boundless joy, millions of highly educated individuals stumble into a terrifying psychological void, overwhelmed by an unexpected and crushing sense of profound existential emptiness. For decades, the institutional machinery provided us with a comforting and highly structured illusion of purpose. The syllabus dictated our priorities. The examination schedule organized our seasons, and the grading rubric quantified our exact worth. We surrendered our beautiful autonomy in exchange for this predictable certainty. When that external architecture is suddenly stripped away upon graduation, we are left standing naked in a chaotic and unforgiving reality. Without a teacher present to assign a specific grade, we desperately struggle to evaluate our own actions. We have been systematically trained to seek validation exclusively from external authority figures, making us entirely incapable of validating ourselves. We cling to corporate hierarchies and meaningless professional titles because we terribly fear the silence of our own minds. We replaced the safety of the classroom with the sterile comfort of the cubicle. This terrifying collapse of meaning manifests as a silent epidemic among the most privileged and successful graduates. They accomplished every single goal that society demanded, executing the master plan with absolute flawless precision. Yet, as they stare at their impressive bank accounts and gleaming corporate trophies, a haunting question echoes deep within their exhausted souls. They whisper into the darkness, is this truly all that life has to offer? The education system expertly taught us how to earn a lucrative living, but it completely failed to teach us how to actually live. We mastered complex calculus, analyzed ancient historical texts, and memorized obscure scientific theories. However, we never spent a single hour investigating the deep architecture of our own hearts. We are intellectual giants capable of engineering miracles. Yet we remain absolute infants managing our own internal grief. We have confused the accumulation of technical capabilities with the development of deep moral character. When a society focuses exclusively upon maximizing economic utility, it starves the spiritual infrastructure necessary to sustain human dignity. We produce brilliant engineers who can build magnificent bridges, but who secretly feel entirely disconnected from the people crossing them. The system values output so highly that it willingly destroys the human engine generating it. To reclaim our shattered sense of meaning, we must courageously unlearn almost everything we were explicitly taught. We must stop viewing our lives as a linear syllabus, waiting to be completed and graded by an invisible judge. True meaning is never found on a piece of stamped institutional paper. It is forged within the messy, unpredictable crucible of genuine human connection and authentic, personal vulnerability. We must forgive ourselves for feeling so lost in a world that obsessively glorifies artificial certainty. The profound confusion you experience is not a symptom of personal failure, but a beautiful indication that your human soul is finally rejecting its mechanical conditioning. This painful disorientation is the necessary first step toward awakening from the dogmatic slumber induced by decades of relentless standardized institutional programming. The emptiness we feel is simply the space waiting to be filled by our own voices. The machine we built to serve us has finally decided it no longer needs us. Chapter 10: AI and the Replacement Economy. For over a century, the educational apparatus systematically trained us to function like predictable machines. We were conditioned to process information, execute standardized commands, and endure relentless monotony without ever complaining. However, a terrifying turning point has finally arrived in human history. We have now successfully engineered actual machines that can perform these standardized cognitive tasks infinitely better than any exhausted human being ever could. The wealthy architects of our modern digital economy constantly reassure us with comforting rhetoric. They endlessly claim that artificial intelligence exists merely to empower us and enhance our daily human productivity. Yet, behind closed corporate doors, the absolute truth is chillingly mathematical. They are staring at $15 trillion in global labor costs and realizing that total human replacement is the ultimate path to infinite corporate profit. To grasp the devastating magnitude of this shift, we must remember the brutal enclosure movement of 18th century England. Wealthy landlords realized that raising sheep for the global wool trade was vastly more profitable than allowing peasant farmers to cultivate the common land. They enclosed the fields, evicted the desperate human population, and justified their cruelty by calling it scientific management and necessary agricultural optimization. Today, we are witnessing the exact same phenomenon occurring within the vast fields of human cognition. The massive tech monopolies are performing the ultimate cognitive enclosure, harvesting the collective intellectual output of humanity to train their ravenous algorithms. They justify this massive displacement of the highly educated middle class by utilizing the exact same historical deceptions. They call it structural optimization and inevitable technological progress. The cruel irony of the education trap is now fully revealed for the entire world to see. The system spent billions of dollars transforming brilliant human minds into perfect, unquestioning corporate clerks and standardized data processors. Yet, artificial intelligence represents the absolute zenith of the perfect worker. It requires no sleep, demands no salary, never organizes a labor union, and never questions the morality of its corporate master. As millions of highly educated graduates emerge from universities, deeply burdened by crushing financial debt, they enter a barren landscape. The predictable, repetitive, white-collar jobs they were carefully trained to occupy are rapidly evaporating into the digital ether. The grand educational promise of guaranteed economic security has violently collapsed, leaving an entire generation stranded with outdated skills. In a rapidly accelerating post-human economy, the system continues to mindlessly churn out graduates for an industrial world that utterly ceased to exist. We are facing a colossal structural crisis where the definition of human value must be radically reimagined. If your entire societal worth is determined exclusively by your standardized cognitive output, you will inevitably lose that brutal competition to a soulless machine. We can no longer outsource our deepest purpose to an algorithm. We manufactured our own replacements because we forgot what made us beautiful. The hardest prison to escape is the one we mistake for our own identity. Chapter 11. Reclaiming the Self. For decades, we have allowed a cold bureaucracy to define the absolute limits of our human potential. We have willingly surrendered our sovereignty, believing that a stamped certificate contains the true essence of our identity. We look in the mirror and see the standardized worker we were programmed to become, forgetting the wild soul that existed before the conditioning began. To reclaim our shattered sense of self, we must first commit a profound act of psychological treason against the educational apparatus. We must consciously reject the devastating notion that our deepest worth is correlated with our societal productivity. A genuine human being is not a resume waiting to be optimized, nor are they a collection of standardized skills waiting to be monetized. Reclaiming the self requires us to strip away the heavy armor of institutional expectations that we have worn since childhood. We must dare to explore the vast empty spaces within our own minds that the hidden curriculum tried to erase. What do you actually love to do when no authority figure is grading your performance and when no financial reward is guaranteed? It is within those beautiful moments of pure intrinsic motivation that we finally reconnect with our authentic humanity. We must stop asking the world for permission to exist and stop waiting for an institutional stamp to validate our desires. We have to unlearn the habit of constantly seeking external validation and cultivate a fierce internal compass that points exclusively toward our truth. This journey of unlearning is extraordinarily painful because it forces us to mourn the countless hours we wasted pleasing a system that never cared about us. We will inevitably experience deep confusion as the artificial scaffolding of our lives violently collapses. Yet, this temporary agony is the necessary price we must gladly pay to resurrect the brilliant individual buried beneath the concrete. Breaking free from a system-defined identity means embracing the glorious unpredictability of real human growth. You must allow yourself to be completely useless to the economic machine for a while, simply to remember what it feels like to breathe. True freedom begins when you decide that you would rather be a magnificent anomaly than a perfectly calibrated and highly manageable success. We must disappoint the world before we can finally meet ourselves. True awakening often begins the exact moment we stop searching for answers outside ourselves. Chapter 12. Beyond Education. When we finally strip away the heavy layers of disguise forced upon us by the modern educational system, we can confront the ultimate philosophical question. In a void completely devoid of standardized testing, authoritative grading, and external artificial rewards, what does your heart truly yearn for? Genuine learning was never about acquiring a pale certificate. It is about the profound refinement and complete reconstruction of your soul. Imagine a magnificent world where curiosity is no longer brutally interrupted by the piercing sound of a school bell, but is instead revered as the precious spiritual spark of humanity. True education should be an endless internal exploration, a deep dialogue with the greatest philosophers across history. It does not require sterile classrooms, rigid syllabuses, or the weaponization of fear to maintain fake institutional order. We must radically separate the concept of true education from the institutional machinery of modern schooling. A school might efficiently train you to become a flawlessly functioning gear within society, but only your solitary exploration in the wilderness can give you the wings to fly. As artificial intelligence completely takes over standardized intellectual labor, the only irreplaceable human value will be our unique creativity and boundless empathy. Do not allow these cold grading matrices to define your life trajectory or your core value for another second. Read ancient books that will never appear on any examination. Gaze at the brilliant sky that cannot be quantified by any algorithm, and feel passion that carries no utilitarian purpose. True knowledge should make your soul feel vast, rather than suffocating you with endless social comparison and paralyzing fear. You are an unrepeatable miracle in this boundless universe, not a standardized product forged on an assembly line. We stand at the ultimate turning point of a great era, where the old system violently collapses and a new dawn awaits. This is the moment of absolute individual awakening, Take off the heavy coat woven from blind obedience and reclaim the beautiful person you were before entering the system. Thank you for joining me on this exhaustive and profound philosophical journey. If this documentary helped you see the invisible trajectories of the system, or reawakened your deepest desire for your authentic self, please like and subscribe to my channel. Join me as we continue to explore hardcore reflections on human systems and the hidden architecture of society. If this carefully engineered machine never intended to give you freedom, do you have the absolute courage to rebuild the true value of your own life with your own hands?